In 1991, American television generated more original animated series in a single year than at almost any point in the previous 2 decades, with networks throwing everything at the wall, from a superhero whose powers came from enchanted hammer pants to an animated Wayne Gretzky fighting crime in a tracksuit. Most of these shows were gone inside 12 months, and a few never even got to finish their own stories. What gets me every time I look back at this era is that some of the most ambitious, genuinely creative animation of the early 90s died quietly on Saturday morning television, while the audience had already moved on. These are 10 of those shows. At the peak of his fame in 1991, with over 18 million copies of Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em sold worldwide, MC Hammer was the kind of cultural force that ABC apparently decided needed its own Saturday morning cartoon. You'd think a show built on one of the biggest pop culture figures on the planet had some kind of floor beneath it. It did not. Premiering on September 7th, 1991, Hammerman ran for exactly 13 episodes before vanishing entirely. Built around a youth center worker named Stanley Burrell, which was Hammer's actual given name, who owned a pair of magical dancing shoes that transformed him into a superhero. The shoes gave him his powers, which is either the most committed piece of brand integration in animation history or a creative decision that nobody questioned loudly enough. The real MC Hammer appeared in live-action hosting segments and performed the theme song, adding a layer of personal investment that did nothing to rescue the reviews. Produced by DIC Animation City alongside Italian company Rete Italia SPA and Spanish network Telecinco, Hammerman drew poor notices even by the relaxed critical standards applied to Saturday morning children's television, and the ratings never supported a second season. What genuinely surprised me, though, is where the show ended up. As of 2025, only 10 of the original 13 episodes have resurfaced online. 3 of them are effectively gone, and 5 of the 10 that do exist are only available with a Polish overdub. One of the most commercially backed cartoons of 1991, built on a global star at the absolute height of his fame, now sits classified as partially lost media, with its copyright held by a company called Bustin' Productions Inc. that was suspended in 1993 and never came looking for it, as forgotten as it deserves to be, and yet somehow stranger for it. ProStars might be the most audacious concept the era produced, putting animated versions of Michael Jordan, Bo Jackson, and Wayne Gretzky together as a crime-fighting trio, with NBC placing actual live-action footage of all 3 athletes at the top of each episode to sell the premise. Produced by DIC Entertainment and premiering in September 1991, the show used voice actors for the animated segments, with Dorian Harewood voicing Jordan, Townsend Coleman voicing Gretzky, and Dave Fennoy voicing Jackson, while the real athletes appeared in live-action bookends that varied considerably in how comfortable everyone looked. Here's the thing almost nobody knows. ProStars was originally pitched as part of a children's programming block for ESPN, not NBC. And had that deal gone through, it would have been one of the earliest original animated series on a cable sports network years before that model became standard practice. ESPN passed, NBC picked it up, and it still only survived 1 season. What ended ProStars wasn't specifically poor ratings on its own terms, but a broader network decision to eliminate NBC's entire 1991 to 1992 Saturday morning animated lineup in a single move, shifting resources toward live-action programming, which meant ProStars went down alongside Wish Kid and Yo Yogi as collateral in a strategy pivot rather than a direct cancellation. 3 of the greatest athletes of the 20th century sharing a cartoon universe gone inside a year because a network changed direction. That one genuinely stings a little. Bucky O'Hare aired for 13 episodes in 1991 and then stopped, and that is the complete broadcast history of the series. 13 episodes, no renewal, done. Drawing from the 1984 comic book by Larry Hama and Michael Golden, the series followed Captain Bucky O'Hare commanding the spacecraft Righteous Indignation against the militaristic Toad Empire across a dimension populated entirely by anthropomorphic animals. And it was produced by Sunbow Entertainment with Hasbro backing the toy line, which by early 90s standards meant the commercial machinery for a long-running franchise was already in place. You'd think a Hasbro toy line combined with cult source material and a genuinely inventive science fiction premise would add up to at least a second season, but the series aired, the toys moved reasonably well, and then the story simply ended mid-narrative, with the Toad Wars themselves never resolved on screen. What kept Bucky O'Hare alive in cultural memory wasn't the television run, but the tie-ins surrounding it, particularly the Sunsoft NES video game released in 1992. which was genuinely strong, and a toy line that became collectible enough that original figures now trade on secondary markets at prices serious collectors track. A show that couldn't sustain 13 episodes built its legacy through merchandise, and the original animation itself remains largely unavailable through any official channel as of 2025. This is the one that genuinely should have been something, and the gap between what it was trying to do and what happened to it is about as frustrating as this era gets. The Pirates of Dark Water debuted as a 5-part miniseries on Fox Kids in early 1991 under the title Dark Water, then became a full series on ABC from September 1991 onward, following a prince on a serialized quest to collect 13 treasures before a substance called Dark Water consumed his entire ocean world. Serialized storytelling, an ongoing mythology, characters with actual arcs, on Saturday morning television in 1991. Each half-hour episode reportedly carried a production cost of $500,000, which a 1991 Los Angeles Times report described as the most expensive animated project Hanna-Barbera had taken on up to that point, with each episode containing roughly 12,000 animation cells compared to the 6,000 that were standard for Saturday morning production. The cast included Hector Elizondo, Frank Welker, George Newbern, and Jodie Benson, and Roddy McDowall had originally voiced the character Niddler before leaving the production in a salary dispute, at which point Welker stepped in, having already been providing the character's sound effects throughout, which is a very specific kind of behind-the-scenes chaos. Here's the irony that gets me every time. The show wasn't canceled because audiences rejected it. Hanna-Barbera couldn't consistently meet air date deadlines. The series was pulled in November 1992, and the final episodes didn't air until May 1993, 6 months after cancellation. An expensive, serialized, genuinely ambitious fantasy series killed by a scheduling failure, with only 21 of its planned episodes ever completed and 8 of the 13 treasures collected. The story was never finished. Warner Archive released the complete series on DVD in August 2010. No major streaming platform carries it as of 2025, and fans have been pushing for a revival, or at minimum a conclusion, for over 30 years. The fact that Eon Productions and Danjaq LLC, two of the most protective stewards of a franchise in Hollywood history, licensed an animated series about James Bond's teenage nephew attending prep school is something I find quietly astonishing every time it comes up. James Bond Jr. premiered in syndication in September 1991, ran for 65 episodes across a single season, and then disappeared without leaving much of a trace. Produced by Murakami Wolf Swenson, the series followed Bond's nephew rather than his son, a distinction the producers built in deliberately to avoid conflicting with the film series' continuity, as he attended Warfield Academy and battled a criminal organization called SCUM, which stood for Saboteurs and Criminals United in Mayhem. Corey Burton voiced the lead, Jeff Bennett provided the voice of IQ, and Hasbro produced the toy line, while THQ released a Super NES video game in 1992. For a show with that level of commercial and franchise infrastructure behind it, the total absence of any official home media or streaming release as of 2025 is genuinely puzzling, with 65 episodes of officially licensed James Bond animation existing almost exclusively through fan archives and informal distribution. The show understood what it was, operated within the constraints of its premise rather than straining against them, and that restraint is probably why it holds together better than the concept suggests it should. This one straddles 2 years, but the second season, which aired on Fox in 1991, is the version almost nobody remembers accurately, and the story of how it got there is stranger than most people realize. The animated continuation of Bill and Ted premiered on CBS in 1990 with Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter voicing their own characters, produced by Hanna-Barbera, and that version has a faint cultural memory attached to it. What actually happened in 1991 is that the show migrated from CBS to Fox, production shifted from Hanna-Barbera to DIC Entertainment, and both lead voice actors were replaced by Evan Richards and Christopher Kennedy, leaving the same characters, the same time travel premise, and the DeLorean time machine appearing in every episode as the one thread of visual continuity connecting the two very different versions of the same show. You'd think that level of disruption would register somewhere in the cultural record, but the 1991 Fox season of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures exists in a strange gap, too closely tied to the films to be fully forgotten, and too different from the original version to be remembered with any accuracy. People recall that a cartoon existed. Almost nobody remembers what actually happened to it. Back to the Future. The animated series launched on CBS on September 14, 1991, And this one carried genuine pedigree, produced by Amblin Entertainment and Universal Cartoon Studios, with Christopher Lloyd reprising his role as Doc Brown in live-action segments bookending each episode, and Mary Steenburgen voicing Clara Clayton in the animated portions. Before Bill Nye the Science Guy existed as a television format, Bill Nye himself appeared in live-action educational science segments embedded within the show, which is a detail worth sitting with for a moment. Running for 26 episodes across 2 seasons, the series centered on Doc Brown's sons Jules and Vern, navigating time travel alongside the animated DeLorean DMC-12. And the animated format gave the production freedom to expand the DeLorean DMC-12 well beyond its film configuration, regularly fitting the stainless steel, gull-wing-doored vehicle with new gadgets and modifications that practical engineering could never have accommodated. The show treated the DeLorean DMC-12 as a character with its own identity rather than purely as a plot mechanism, which gave it a visual consistency the films themselves had established and the cartoon honored. CBS canceled it after the 2nd season, citing performance that couldn't match the expectations set by the original films. And the series is available on DVD but absent from major US streaming platforms as of 2025. What the show represented, though, was a genuine attempt by a major studio to extend a beloved film franchise through animation with real production values and actual cast participation. And the fact that it didn't fully work doesn't change what it was trying to do, which puts it several rungs above most of what surrounded it in the 1991 Saturday morning landscape. Taz-Mania premiered on Fox Kids on September 7, 1991, the same date as Hammerman, and within the same launch week as half a dozen other shows on this list. And Warner Brothers Animation built an entire situation comedy around the Tasmanian Devil from Looney Tunes, structured around a suburban family dynamic in which everyone behaves like a standard sitcom household, while Taz himself remains completely feral. The contrast was the joke. It worked consistently, and the show ran for 65 episodes across 4 seasons. What's strange is that Taz-Mania is probably the least remembered series on this list, despite being one of the longest-running, sitting in the shadow of Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Adventures throughout its entire broadcast life. 2 shows from the same studio that landed with considerably more cultural force. The fourth wall breaks, and the show's willingness to acknowledge its own absurdity gave it a personality that holds up, and yet no complete DVD release of all 65 episodes exists in the United States as of 2025, with the series appearing on Warner Brothers digital platforms only intermittently. For 65 episodes of original Warner Brothers animation, that feels like an oversight that shouldn't still be happening. Fish Police is where things get specifically grim, and also genuinely funny, because CBS's attempt to replicate what The Simpsons had done for Fox involved an adult animated primetime series set in an underwater world structured as a detective noir, where all the characters were marine life operating under human names in a crime procedural framework. The lead character was named Inspector Gill. A villain was named Biscotti Calamari. CBS scheduled it on Friday nights mid-season and canceled it after 6 episodes. The broader context matters here, because the success of The Simpsons triggered a wave of primetime adult animation attempts across all 3 major networks in the early 90s, none of which found traction, and Fish Police went down alongside Capital Critters on ABC, which ran for 7 episodes and carried the name of Stephen Bochco, creator of Hill Street Blues and L.A. Law, as further proof that prestige television credentials provided no particular immunity to the primetime animation problem. Both shows were gone before spring 1992 arrived. Fish Police is the kind of show you'd invent as a hypothetical to illustrate how chaotic network television was in this period, and then you discover it actually exists. 6 episodes. The Toad Wars at least got 13. Capital Critters rounds out this list as probably its most ironic entry, created by Stephen Bochco, produced in partnership with Hanna-Barbera, set in a White House basement where a colony of mice navigated Washington, D.C. political machinery, and premiering on ABC in January 1992 before being canceled after 7 episodes. A prestige television creator, a major animation studio, a politically charged setting, and a primetime slot on one of the 3 major networks, and the result was 7 episodes. Done. What's worth noting is that the cancellation carried consequences inside Hanna-Barbera beyond the show itself, contributing to a broader accounting of the studio's production problems in this period, including the scheduling failures that had already undermined Pirates of Dark Water. Jane Barbera lost her position as executive in charge of production, replaced by Catherine Winder, as the creative and logistical chaos that had plagued multiple Hanna-Barbera projects through 1991 and 1992 finally produced a structural response. Capital Critters now exists as a curiosity, a show that on paper had more going for it than almost anything else attempting primetime animation in 1991, and it lasted one fewer episode than Fish Police. What 1991 actually represented in animation was a shakeout, and the timing was brutal. Nickelodeon launched Doug, Rugrats, and The Ren and Stimpy Show on August 11, 1991, resetting what audiences expected from original animation almost overnight. Disney had the Disney Afternoon running at full strength. Fox Kids was building something with real momentum. And in that environment, the shows on this list weren't all bad ideas poorly executed. Several of them, Pirates of Darkwater most clearly, were genuinely ambitious projects that ran into production realities, network politics, and the specific bad luck of launching in a year when the bar moved on them mid-run. What strikes me looking across all 10 is how many of them simply ran out of time before finishing their own stories. With the Toad Wars unresolved, the 13 Treasures of Mare uncollected, and the primetime animation wave collapsing before any of those shows found their footing. Television in 1991 moved faster than most of these productions could match, and the ones left behind stayed left behind. Some stories end before they should, and that doesn't make them less worth knowing about. If the gap between what early 90s animation was reaching for and what it actually became is the kind of story that interests you, this channel keeps going back to exactly those moments where ambition met reality and lost.